I've said it before and I will say it again. Religion is a force of nature. Just look at the Crusades. No other force could have inspired common folk to do what they did. Soldiers who killed in God's name are nothing new. But these men marched 4,000 miles across Europe and Asia Minor and fought for decades against overwhelming odds. What compelled them? The promise of salvation after death, perhaps? Or was it something more earthly? To find out what drove the Crusaders, we need to go back to the year 1095. At that time, Western Europe was ruled by Christian kings, but the Holy Land was under Muslim control. And I don't mean the Arabian Peninsula or Central Asia. I'm talking about the modern-day countries of Israel and Palestine. How did this happen? Well, following the death of Muhammad in 632 AD, his followers spread all over the place, and by the 8th century, they had conquered everything from Spain to Iran. However, their advance into France was stopped by the Battle of Tours in 732. Then there was a pause. Muslims would conquer parts of Iberia and Sicily, but the rest of Europe was safe, for now. Meanwhile, trade between Europe and Asia was booming. Venetian merchants sailed to the east, while Genoese ones headed south towards Africa. For centuries, they had to pay Muslim intermediaries to protect their ships and cargo. This system worked until the 10th century, when the greedy Muslims started raising prices. So European leaders asked themselves why they couldn't capture the eastern cities directly. That's when Pope Urban II came up with the idea to send holy warriors to the Holy Land. He called the First Crusade, and soon tens of thousands of Europeans were heading east. After crossing the Byzantine Empire without paying a toll, they headed to Nicaea, an important city in Anatolia. It fell after a 6-week siege, but then the Crusaders got lost and started pillaging villages. By the time they reached the Sea of Marmara, only 20,000 were left alive. They continued their march through Anatolia, capturing some cities and sacking others. But they faced a big problem. They didn't know how to get to Jerusalem. The Byzantines offered to help, but wanted them to wait until 1099. But the Crusaders were eager to get going and started marching towards Antioch, an important city in northern Syria. When word of their arrival reached the Seljuk Sultan, Kilij Arslan I, he left his campaign in Persia and raced towards Antioch. In the meantime, the Crusaders built fortifications around the city and waited for the attack. On June 21, 1098, the Muslims attacked, but their cavalry failed to break through the Crusader lines. On the contrary, the knights charged into the enemy ranks and routed the Seljuks. The Sultan managed to escape, but his army was defeated. With their biggest threat gone, the Crusaders finally captured Antioch on June 3, 1098. They spent a year there recuperating and gathering supplies before marching further east. This time they followed the Mediterranean coast, southwards towards Tyre, where a fierce battle ensued. After suffering heavy losses, the Crusaders retreated to a castle near Sidon. When King Baldwin of Jerusalem heard about their presence, he immediately set out to destroy them. He cut off their water supply and laid siege to the castle. But one night, Peter the Hermit, a holy man who inspired many crusaders to join the fight, walked out of the castle. According to legend, he told the Muslims that God had sent him to negotiate peace. While the Muslims were distracted, Baldwin's men snuck in and opened the gates to let the Crusaders out. After realizing what had happened, the king chased after them, but the Crusaders managed to regroup and fight their way to Jerusalem. On July 15, 1099, they entered the city and started massacring everyone inside. Muslims, Jews, and even fellow Christians who did not join the crusade were killed. Men, women, and children were thrown off the walls of Jerusalem and hacked to pieces. According to historians, over 1,000 people were killed during the sack. After the dust settled, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was founded, and European Christians could finally visit the Holy Land without paying tolls. But this victory was far from easy. Ever since the Crusaders seized Jerusalem, the surrounding Muslim states were keen to drive them out. To stop the attacks, The Kingdom of Jerusalem allied itself with the Eastern Roman Empire, but their alliance wasn't strong. Countless times the Byzantines would order the Crusaders to stay out of their affairs and mind their own business. Even so, the Kingdom of Jerusalem kept growing. Within 30 years, they controlled all of the Levant. And yet, despite their victories, life in the Kingdom of Jerusalem was tough. There were constant attacks to fend off and not enough soldiers to defend the border. That's why Pope Innocent III decided to launch a second crusade. He summoned the French king and Louis VII and his nephew, the future Richard the Lionheart, to conquer Damascus. Unfortunately for them, the kingdom was well fortified and the Crusaders couldn't capture it. Instead, they fought a few battles against the Muslim lords and then went home. Things went much better for the Teutonic Order. This holy order was founded in 1118 to protect pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land. But soon they grew ambitious and conquered most of the modern-day countries of Israel and Palestine. For the next 200 years, they fought alongside the kingdoms of Jerusalem and Tripoli to repel the Muslim invaders. Each side won several battles and sieges, but no one could claim victory. This stalemate lasted until 1228, when an Italian merchant named Giovanni da Montecorvino discovered a direct sea route to India. Soon, European merchants could buy spices and gems without paying Muslim middlemen. With their role now meaningless, the European Christians decided to return home. By 1291, the last Crusader stronghold had fallen. Even though the Crusades were over, Europeans still wanted to visit the Holy Land, so they made a deal with the Mamluk Sultanate. They could enter the country if they paid a hefty tax, and I don't mean 1 or 2 gold coins. We're talking about 125 gold coins per pilgrim. Of course, most people couldn't afford that, which led to another crusade. In 1396, King Charles VI of Naples assembled a small army and set out to conquer Jerusalem. His plan was to bypass the Mamluk Sultanate and establish his own Crusader state in the region. But while crossing Anatolia, he was ambushed and killed by Turkish horsemen. Without a leader, the Crusaders panicked and fled to Constantinople, where they were welcomed like heroes. A few months later, Charles's son, King Ladislaus of Naples, tried again, but he suffered the same fate. For the next 250 years, Europeans could only dream of visiting the Holy Land. That all changed in 1697, when the Republic of Venice conquered Crete, an island close to the Middle East. Now, Europeans could easily attack the Ottoman Empire and take Jerusalem. The next year, Pope Innocent XII launched the Children's Crusade to conquer the Holy Land. You heard that right. This holy mission was led by children. Most of them were from Germany and France, where preachers like Nicholas of Cologne whipped them up into a frenzy. Some of the kids took to the streets chanting, "God wills it." Others threw their parents into prison for holding them back. However, once they reached the Mediterranean, they found out they weren't welcome in the Holy Land. Many children died of starvation and disease, and the rest returned home empty-handed. In the meantime, Europe was being ravaged by the Black Death, which killed millions. So starting a new crusade was out of the question. Another 200 years passed, and Europe was ready for one final attempt to conquer the Holy Land. In 1860, French troops landed in Syria and forced the Ottomans to retreat behind the River Jordan. 3 years later, Britain, France, Italy, and the Papal States joined the campaign and occupied all of the Levant. But they soon realized that ruling over the region was a costly affair. Plus, there were hardly any resources to plunder anymore. So they returned the region to the Ottomans and established the British Mandate of Palestine. So why did the Crusades fail? Well, for starters, the Crusaders were never united. Even though they all worshipped the same God, each prince had different goals. Some wanted land and power, others wanted wealth and fame, and then there were those who genuinely wanted to free the Holy Land. The second reason is that the Crusaders underestimated their enemies. They thought that the Muslims were a bunch of uncivilized barbarians, but in reality, they had highly trained soldiers and knew how to use siege engines. Third, the Crusaders relied too much on luck. Time and time again, they thought God would save them from their enemies. But even miracles can't defy the laws of physics. Still, the legacy of the Crusades lives on. Even today, millions of Christians travel to the Holy Land and walk in the footsteps of Jesus Christ. Thank you for watching.